Hey, it's Flippin' MJ here. Welcome to the June 27th edition of Up to Date MMA. Alright, Flip, we got Gilbert Melendez versus Pat Healy. Interesting matchup that nobody cares about. So we're going to move on to the next one. Vitor Belfort versus Alan Belcher. Now this is something that people care about. It's an interesting matchup at the 185. What are your thoughts?
I love it, actually. You know, I was looking for an interesting challenger for Alan Belcher. I thought that, you know, there was some pretty good matchups coming up, you know, for him. But Vitor Belfort kind of, you know, it's out of nowhere. Yeah. This is a guy who was a #1 contender. That was the last fight that he had. You know, he was supposed to fight Wanderlei Silva, but you know, Alan Belcher's been looking to get into that top tier and fight some of these top guys, and I think Vitor Belfort is a real stiff test for him. Yeah. You know, I'm totally looking forward to seeing that fight. I mean, he wasn't going to fight Chris Weidman. You know, everybody kind of thinks that he should be the one getting the title shot. Yeah. You know, and Belcher, I mean, he could probably use another fight, especially coming after that long layoff, but he looked excellent against Usman Palhares. Oh, yeah. But I think right now, Vitor Belfort, it's a well-rounded game that he's facing. You know, submissions, good stand-up, and it's a good test. I think both of these guys kind of match up evenly, and I kind of give Belcher the edge. I think he's a little bit hungrier. Vitor's been around for a while, but you never know. Yeah, I think so too. I think Belcher comes in, destroys Vitor Belfort, and then it'd be really easy to get him next in line either with Anderson Silva or the win. You know, if they do match up Weidman against Anderson Silva, we'll see what happens. But obviously, I'd like to see Belcher versus Chris Weidman, or Weidman. We'll see what happens. Okay, Travis Browne against Bigfoot Silva. That's another interesting matchup. I think Travis Browne, future heavyweight champion, I think. And I think he's going to make quick work of Bigfoot Silva. It's an interesting matchup, though. Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. I mean, as far as Travis Browne goes, I don't think that I've really seen too much of him on the ground other than the Rob Broughton fight. Both of those guys were gassed. They were fighting out at altitude in Denver. Kind of no excuse, I thought, in that fight because Browne had been training at altitude in Albuquerque, you know, so I thought that he would have performed a little bit better. He's been on a tear, though. He's been doing some great stuff there in the heavyweight division. As far as Bigfoot Silva coming off that tough loss, you know, to Cain Velasquez, but Cain's a monster. He always comes to bring it. So, you know, it should be pretty interesting to see if Bigfoot can get it to the ground and fight him there. But I think Browne has the better stand-up, and I think Browne takes it. Yeah, I think so, too. All right, probably the biggest news of the week, Frank Mir going to go over to Strikeforce. He's now going to fight Daniel Cormier. It's a pretty interesting matchup. Initially, you know, Tim Sylvia was supposed to come in and fight Daniel Cormier in his last fight in Strikeforce. I guess either way, Daniel Cormier is going to come over to the UFC after this fight. I don't know, man. If I was Frank Mir, I don't think I would have taken this fight. This is a really dangerous fight. I see the same thing happening. You know, what Cormier did to Josh Barnett is probably going to end up happening to Mir. Mir's always got that chance on the ground if it goes there, but I don't know. I feel kind of bad about Mir, you know, taking this fight because if he loses, it's really going to, you know, set him back, you know, quite a bit in this, you know, in his career. But well, the thing about Frank Mir is he's always a game opponent, so he always finds those big fights that can get him thrown up to the top of the division. So, you know, it's no real surprise to me that Frank Mir would take a fight like this. You look at the wins that Cormier did have, you know, in through that through that tournament. So it's kind of, he's beat some big names. Frank Mir's another big name, and Cormier's an up and comer as far as, you know, he's actually already at the top of the division as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. But Frank Mir beats him. He puts him right back up to, you know, #2, #1 contender in the heavyweight division, possibly next in line for a title shot again. Yeah. As far as Cormier is nothing but, you know, further moving up the division here. Yeah. You know, he beats a big name like Frank Mir that puts him up at the top in the UFC, possibly a title fight. It would be interesting to see though if Cain Velasquez gets past Junior Dos Santos to these two teammates fight. He did mention that he could make the 205 weight class. So, you know, we talked about this earlier. Maybe he could come down, fight John Jones or Jan Henderson, depending on the winner. But, you know, there's nothing but interesting things going on for Daniel Cormier at this time. Yeah. No, that's true, man. I mean, Frank Mir, that's one thing you got to say about Frank Mir is, like, he's not scared of anybody. He'll step up. He'll take those tough fights. And I just think matchup-wise, it's a tough one for him. But, you know, good luck to both of them. You know, it's going to be an interesting matchup. All right, then we got Anderson Silva's camp kind of coming back and saying, listen, we either want to give a title shot to Rich Franklin, or we'd like a super fight with GSP. And then you got kind of Nick Diaz in there, kind of interjecting in just right before we shot this, actually saying, listen, let's do a fight with Anderson Silva. Man, I mean, for me, it's a no-brainer. I'd love to see Nick Diaz in there with Anderson Silva. I think it's an interesting matchup.
both standing up and on the feet. I don't know. What do you think?
You know, Rich Franklin, I think he probably about 1 or 2 wins away. You know, he's been, all of his fights have been at 195. They've all been catch weights. You know, but that's the thing too, is that, you know, these guys don't have to cut as much weight. When Rich Franklin is expected to fight at 205 sometimes, and he's actually cutting weight. You know, even with the last fight, he was going to fight Kung Lee, and he was, you know, halfway across the world, and they brought him in a couple weeks early to take that fight with Vanderlei Silva.
Right. And
he performed wonderfully, I thought. You know, so it would be interesting, but, you know, it's the same thing. I think we saw it twice. I don't see why Anderson Silva wouldn't clinch up with him again,
right.
Take him out with some knees. As far as GSP, they're kind of looking at a catch weight. The interesting thing about Nick Diaz saying that if he comes back, you know, he's eligible in February. Just the way that the division's tied up right now, I think we were thinking that the Condit GSP matchup would take place in November, so a fight probably wouldn't happen with Anderson Silva and GSP till February. I'm sure GSP would want to take that time to gain the weight properly, even if it was for a catch weight, so you probably wouldn't look till the summer. Nick Diaz says that he doesn't care. He says, I'll meet him at 185. Yeah. That's kind of where I want him. You know, that's what was released through Cesar Gracie's blog, so, you know, I'd definitely be interested in seeing that. I think Nick's a game opponent. I can't remember the last time I saw him getting taken out, you know, on striking. I think the jiu-jitsu's a pretty good matchup, so it would be pretty interesting to watch that fight, especially at 185 where Nick has looked really strong. Yeah,
dude, that would be a sick fight. Nick Diaz, 185 versus Anderson Silva. It'd be a really interesting matchup. All right, quick note here. As far as my kind of must-see fight of the week, you know, obviously everybody watched UFC 149. What they probably didn't watch was Belfort 72. And you had Carla Mosa versus Brian Baker, and Carla Mosa looked awesome in that fight. He got a quick inverted heel hook, and if you haven't checked that out, go on YouTube right now and check that out. So on to UFC 149, you know, Flip and I both watched the fights, just like everybody else. We were bored to death. That was just a horrible night of fights. It was really hard to watch. An otherwise really good fight that kind of, you know, sucked because of the card as a whole was Faber versus Browne. What are your thoughts on Faber? I thought he had a really good outing. It's just one of those things where the height and reach advantage of Browne was the difference maker. Everywhere else they were pretty evenly matched. I mean, their grappling, their striking was good, but Browne's length just got the better of Faber.
Yeah, it's the length. I think a little bit of the speed. You know, I mean, you're right, Faber. He's kind of he's in a weird position. I mean, there's not really anywhere he can go. The guys are getting a little bit younger than him. They're a little bit quicker than him. You know, he's still super talented. He can hold his own with a lot of the guys in either of the divisions that he had been fighting in. It's just these younger guys are just a little bit quicker to the punch. And, you know, it's something that I don't really see him taking another title fight anytime soon. I think he takes a lot of interesting fights. I think he can beat a ton of #1 contenders and be a #1 contender. But if you can't beat the champs, you wind up in a Kenny Florian position, and, you know, what do you wind up doing? So, you know, as far as the fight, I thought it was really interesting. You know, I love watching technical matchups. But like you said, it was the rest of the card that just kind of, you know, it dragged on. So by the time you got to the main event, you weren't really too interested in it. So,
yeah, speaking of dragging on, Cheick Kongo, Sean Jordan, what the hell was that all about? I mean, I guess it was vintage Cheick Kongo. I picked Cheick to, you know, hump out a decision, and he did just that. Just kind of disappointing. You know, Cheick Kongo, really, you know, a decorated striker. He's really a great fighter, but for whatever reason, after that first round happens, you know, he tends to take the safe route, and he's ready to just kind of grind out a decision.
Yeah, he hasn't looked the same for a long time. I don't know. Even in that fight with Matt Mitrione, that was kind of a snooze fest. I haven't expected too much from Cheick Kongo. It used to be that I was really excited to watch him, as you know, when especially after that Cain Velasquez fight. I mean, he put Cain down multiple times, and it became one of these things where you said the wrestling is kind of what's doing it to him, and now he's gotten to where he wrestles but doesn't strike anymore, and he's just kind of lost that luster.
Yeah, it's interesting because Kongo, he's one of those guys that has the striking, he's developed his wrestling game, but he's just become so risk averse right now that he's not doing what it takes to make himself an exciting fighter, make himself marketable, and push for those, you know, those title fights or getting in top contention. So be interesting to see what he does. Hopefully somebody talks to him in his camp and says, listen, dude, let's take that next step. Let's get back to what you used to be into. So Matt Riddle, kind of the submission of the night, the only submission, really one of the only interesting fights to happen for the majority of that UFC 149 card. So he got that submission win, which is great. You know, Yep. Props to Matt Riddle out of Throwdown here in Las Vegas. Now he's calling out Dan Hardy. I mean, what do you think about that fight? That's, to me, it's interesting because Dan Hardy, to me, is a notch above Matt Riddle. But Matt Riddle's, his wrestling and his jiu-jitsu looked really good. And that's kind of, you know, the opposite of Dan Hardy, where Dan Hardy comes in striking strong. I don't know. I'm curious to see how that goes down.
I think it would be an interesting fight. I know Dan Hardy's tied up with the Amir Sadallah fight right now, but just based on them being so up and down, you know, Matt Riddle, I mean, up and down based, you know, more on his performances. I mean, he won a split decision to a guy that normally fights at 155. Yeah. And you know, he came in and he put on a pretty good showing. He's tough as nails. He's one of the tougher guys in the division. I'd be interested to see that fight. Yeah. You know, I don't know how he would stand with Dan Hardy. That's, you know, questionable. I think that Dan Hardy could probably take him out very easily, but he imposes that wrestling game, that clinch game. You know, it could be in for a long, long night. You know, and it could be a boring fight. Also, you never know. But you know, the thing with Matt Riddle is it's always fun to watch him fight. So yeah, Matt Riddle, he brings kind of that certain energy that it's fun to watch him. It's interesting. He's 7-3 now in the UFC. So I got to take my hat off to him. Him calling out a guy like Dan Hardy, you know, more power to him. If they make that fight happen, or if it happens down the road, it'd be interesting to see. Yeah, it's a fight that could definitely be made, so I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. All right, so Saturday night, streaming live on their website, Invicta FC, we got Shayna Baszler versus Sarah McMahon. Sarah McMahon coming in at 5-0, and you got Shayna Baszler at 14-6. Shayna's got 13 submission wins. She does have losses to Sarah Kaufman, who's going to be fighting Ronda Rousey pretty soon here. And she also has a loss to Cyborg. But since then, she's kind of evened out. It's going to be an interesting matchup. Also, Liz Carmouche is going to be on the card. She's 6-2. She's going up against Caitlin Young. Interesting, you know, night of fights. I like the fact that they're going to stream it for free. It's a chance for fans to really get in there, see some of the top women's competition. You know, a lot of the top women fighters are now in Strikeforce, you know, or they're fighting, you know, for other smaller promotions. So it's nice to kind of see Invicta FC come up and put on big shows like this. So aside from that, though, we've got Tuff-N-Uff coming up with a card in August. You want to talk a little bit about that, Flip? Yeah, it's Tuff-N-Uff's August 18th. It's out in Mesquite, Nevada, so it's a Mayhem in Mesquite. You know, just now that we're talking about Invicta, I mean, they're picking up a lot of the female fighters that do come through Tuff-N-Uff. Tuff-N-Uff has done a lot to grow the female MMA portion of the game. And they usually bring some pretty tough girls. I mean, just looking at that 7-second, was a 5-second knockout? 5-second, yeah, by Veronica Rothenhausler. Yeah. You know, so it's stuff that, you know, we wind up seeing these women coming through Tuff-N-Uff and wind up, you know, coming out onto shows like Invicta. They do eventually make their way to this, you know, Strikeforce and other places as well. But you know, if you ever want to catch some of these young female fighters, Tuff-N-Uff's one of the places to do it. And you know, there's always interesting fights there. Yeah. It's going to be an interesting night of fights. Go check them out. And as always, you know, for additional coverage and exclusive content, make sure and check us out at fightlifemedia.com.